Everybody, I'd like to read a footnote from my paper, Merging 20th Century Art Music and Pre-Recorded Sound, 17 pieces. The footnote is I'll read the sentences from one of my chapters on page 73. I'll just read the sentence that the footnote. Like the first two parts of Tadvana Lila, I tried to convey a dramatic, mysterious, ominous fleetingness and peacefulness. It takes some of the lyrical content and restructures it out of alignment harmonically, and the cuts add to the sense of fleetingness. So that footnote is there on fleetingness, and I'll read this to you now. This fleetingness of surface forms with deeper undercurrents was the main idea, inspired by Vedanta and Buddhism, but also Sufism, Gnostic, Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish mysticism, which may view reality as consciousness like infinite ocean depths, giving rise to emotion and deeper mind states as undercurrents, in turn giving rise to mind as surface waves which give rise to physical existences, perhaps analogous to pan-experientialism, panpsychism, or Chinese centrality. That atheism eschews beliefs appears quite similar to modalities of mysticism and has the added strength of realism. Just a side note, that reminds me of the atheist mystic Virginia Woolf, and can be in line with many philosophies like Barthes's metaphysical as neutral, where reduction leads to knowledge, but not wisdom, perhaps because knowledge forms complexity, contrast and meaning, and fractures simplicity. It can be viewed as a form of pan-protopsychism, which is the antithesis of panpsychism, which David Chalmers explains on page 18 of Panpsychism and Pan-Protopsychism, synthesize as Russellian monism. On page 11, Chalmers asks, are quiddities physical properties from which material existence follows? I wondered if quiddities in constitutive Russellian panpsychism were something like symbols or consciousness. In my view, complexity is not against the neutral. Just a side note here, that does remind me of Gautama saying that there's the Dharmakaya, which is the foundation existence, and then the next layer is that which rests on the Dharmakaya or reality, and then you have non-reality, which could be possibly imagination, could be one of the things. So where was I? Chalmers asks, are quiddities physical properties from which material existence follows? I wondered if quiddities in constitutive Russellian panpsychism were something like symbols or consciousness. In my view, complexity is not against the neutral. I believe we do not have the conscious ability to realize many truths, to be able to express ideas beyond a certain point. And our words and wild concepts like nothing, everything, or chaos may not exist as we view them, though I believe that internal insights like mental factors can be insightful. On page 13 of Ludwig Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, it states that if I know an object, I also know all its possible occurrences in states of affairs. Padmasambhava's Tibetan Book of the Dead states that voidness is not to be taken as nothingness, but as intellect and consciousness, shining and blissful. On a side note, that's one of the main schisms between Shankaracharya, and Buddhistic thinking that goes back to Gaudapada and Santarakshita. That schism of the self or Atman, that tiny beyond the Ganesha particle that in the Vedas it has that particle which is I. That schism that between the Hinduistic, the Vedanta philosophy and the that which predates it, the Buddhistic, well, maybe 500, 600 BC. So it did influence Vedantic thinking heavily. So what Padmasambhava is saying here is that it's blissful and shining, and I don't see any, uh, any problem, any inherent kind of disparity between thinking that the self is nothingness, which or everything or whatever you want to say, because those concepts, when it comes to those levels, become meaningless. If you'll see what I mean when I talk further about this. So, Padmasambhava's Tibetan Book of the Dead states that voidness is not to be taken as nothingness, but as intellect and consciousness, shining and blissful. And the Gospel of Mary Magdalene speaks of the awareness of I and the transcendent. Just on a side note, that's much like Schelling and Fichte and the German idealism, the transcendental idealism, including metempsychosis, because they believed in primary consciousness as primary. Consciousness was mind is the substratum, is reality, and everything stems from that. Padmasambhava also asks, since your own immediate awareness is just this, how can you say that you do not know anything with regard to it? A panpsychism and metempsychosis are expounded in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Later I found the stanzas 18 and 23 of Vasubandhu's Buddhist work Trimsika, or 30 stanzas, describes a similar concept wherefrom dharmas ensue ripples and waves which can be called atmans or souls, or distinctions which have no nature of their own. The philosophy that consciousness is fundamental to reality appears in the works of Plato. I'm just thinking which Plato, it was the Phaedo. Plotinus, Thales, Spinoza, Leibniz, William James, Bertrand Russell. Of course, he came to that conclusion much later, and it was not quite, it was semi-altered for quasi, not quite mind is primary, but going in that direction. Alfred North Whitehead and Galen Strawson. And the idea of transcendental consciousness occurs in post-Enlightenment philosophy like Kant, Hegel, Brentano. Jung spoke of the tendencies of the unconscious mind, hinting at the collective unconscious. Those sympathetic to neutral monism, where at least a third element exists apart from mind and matter, were Bertrand Russell, Baruch Spinoza, David Hume, and others, and William James talks of it in Does Consciousness Exist? These wave peaks of consciousness and ripples forming dharmas seem like Brentano's idea of directed intention giving rise to consciousness. For Brentano, intention and acts are characteristic of mind, and intentional objects which exist in the mind are not actually real, as explained on page 3 of Paul M. Livingston's Edmund Husserl From Intentionality to Transcendental Phenomenology. Yet Jung said in a 1957 interview that fantasies are facts. You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy, and it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has such a fantasy, another man may lose his life. And so physical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world within. Though I wrote Tadvana Lila with Vedanta in mind, at the time of this writing, 2021, I neither rejected or affirmed the four gross generalizations, and this is much like Buddhistic kataskoti, that the one is real and the individual soul is real, Christianity, Islam, that the one is real and the individual soul is not real, Vedanta, Hinduism, that the one is not real and the individual soul is not real, some forms of Buddhism, and the one is not real and the individual soul is not real, atheism. So you have, as in Buddhistic kataskoti, four different possibilities that can be there, and you can see that from a kind of algorithmic perspective. Not that that's completely true, but as everything, I believe that that's perhaps an insightful analogy. For Christians and Muslims, both God, loaded word, or everything beyond what is knowable, including mind, and the physical world are real. For Buddhists, neither God or reality or the physical world is real. For Hindus, only God or all that is beyond the knowable and mind as reality is real. And for atheists, only the physical world is real. Does Maya or the Gnostic demiurge come into play to create panpsychism from pan-protopsychism? In my view, there may be infinite properties beyond our knowing that could interfere with causal chains of logical events. It is just that it is unlikely in our everyday lives to witness anything like this, such as through higher conscious intervention. In Shams Tabrizi's 40 Rules of Love, Rule 4 states that intellect ties people in knots and risks nothing, but love dissolves all tangles and risks everything. It's much like art, actually, isn't it? That to write great poetry or novels or create a beautiful piece of art or music, you have to be willing to be wrong or take risks. So Rule 4 states that intellect ties people in knots and risks nothing, but love dissolves all tangles and risks everything, and that intellect does not easily break down, whereas love can effortlessly reduce itself to rubble. Bodhidharma, the first patriarch, traditionally accepted as transmitter of Buddhism from India to China, says, erudition and knowledge are not only useless, they cloud your awareness. Doctrines are only for pointing to the mind. That's much like the I think it was the French symbolists who thought that you can only point towards reality, you can't know it. Um, and once you see the mind, why pay attention to doctrines? So that was what Bodhidharma thought. Anaxagoras believed that the unfathomable one, reality, divine, balanced itself out where needed throughout life. Veritas, awareness, perception, in natural course. Although he thought that awareness cannot order the physical world. And indeed, I think this idea could extend to an idea that I, awareness, cannot order the physical world. Only greater awareness can. The Persian Sufi Bayazid Bastami said that forgetfulness of self is remembrance of God. In the Trika ideology of Kashmir Shaivism, it is thought that the limitation that gives rise to causality is an interaction by which the subject imparts fleeting conditions on the object, and that causal time is too unstable to support relations between subject and object via determined and definite conditions. That really reminds me of the fine balance between individual perception and external consciousness and mind. The primary unmanifest consciousness, the first cause relative to the Neoplatonic one, is a timeless, spontaneous act without limitation or condition. It is active, giving rise to extroversion and introversion, very much, on a side note, very much like a verb over a noun, away from facticity, I suppose you could say, that mediates between the unmanifest source and phenomenal realities, and an idea that radically departs from other schools of thought, including Advaita Vedanta, for example, as propounded by Siddha Rameshwar Maharaj. Whether it is Bodhidharma's bloodstream sermon, the philosopher Nishida on nothingness, Meister Eckhart on immanence, or Marguerite Porret's practical mysticism, or at least I consider it so, the essential message is the importance of seeing one's nature. Whether seen as immanence, transcendence, or nothingness, it is shining and blissful. It is a nature that can be hard to discern, for awareness is the fire that cannot burn itself. The Shaivite Trika Yogini Laleshwari, or Lal Ded, the Kashmiri mystic, said, "I searched for myself until I grew weary, but no one I know now reaches the hidden knowledge by means of effort. Then, absorbed in Thou art this, I found the place of wine. There all the jars are filled, but no one is left to drink."